Okay.
Good day. My name is Chilozana Eze. I'm the president of Igbo Studies Association. You are welcome to our monthly Igbo Studies Association lecture series. Today, we are welcoming Professor Nwakanma, who is going to give us a lecture on the Igbo concept of the self. Professor Nwakanma was born in Ibadan, Nigeria. He was educated at the prestigious government college, Umuahia. He studied English at the University of Jos and poetry at Washington University in St. Louis, where he received his MFA, Masters in Fine Arts. He further went to St. Louis University in Missouri, where he got his PhD in literature. Obi is a Nigerian poet, critic, and academic. He has published scholarly books and books of poetry, which include Christopher Kibo, 1930 to 1967, Thirsting for Sunlight, and The Roped Urn, a book of poetry, winner of Association of Nigeria Authors Cadbury Poetry Prize in 1996. His book of poems, Birth Cry, published in 2016, was a finalist for the 2016 Nigeria Literature Prize. He writes a regular Sunday column on Vanguard newspaper called The Orbit. His works have also appeared in many other Nigerian newspapers and journals. He is easily one of the top 10 Nigerian public intellectuals. He is, as far as I'm concerned, a profound thinker, a gadfly, and a philosopher. He's currently a professor at the University of Central Florida. Obi is going to talk to us about the current state of the Igbo culture. His lecture is titled Mu Nagi, the Igbo culture of the self. Please help me to welcome Professor Obi Nwakanma.
All right. Jonathan, thank you very much. First of all, I thank you for inviting me to this really important talk. I feel very privileged to be part of the Igbo attempt to assert an intellectual tradition, which we have. I thank everyone for coming here to listen to me. It's always a privilege to have one's peers come to these events. I feel both humbled and privileged to be here amongst you. Now, my talk, and I wish I could have done it in Igbo if I thought a bit more about it. But because I didn't think too quickly about it, I'm really going to do it in the English language, unfortunately, but hopefully in time, maybe we'll have some way of translating it into Igbo. It's a tentative talk. As I was saying to Chiloza yesterday, I hope I do not bore you. But what we are going to talk about is Mu Nagi, conceptualizing the Igbo theory of self. Because sometimes we do take this idea of onwe, literally for granted. But the first thing to notice is that there is no gender pronoun in Igbo language, no he or she. All references to the individual are covered in the neutral nya, the singular, or ha, the plural. I've always been amazed at each point of the cultural evolution of Western thought, how they anticipate Igbo ideas thousands of years later. The current cultural assertion by gender activists in Europe and America, who insist now on the they, them marker, and in the closing of the signifying gender marks, with all they perceive as its limitations in identifying the self, is a non-issue in Igbo epistemological and hermeneutical systems. First, because Igbo culture already knew that the human being is complex, yet can be contained in the simplest of descriptions. Mando or Mando, that being which reflects the highest embodiment of life. Second, because variations in Igbo beingness, variations of beingness in Igbo thought corresponds to and are very subtly contained in two primary conditions, the neutral and the positive, which fused together energizes the completion of being as a transitional experience. The idea of being in Igbo thought thus acts at two phenomenological sides, the primary self and the secondary self, secondary but the related self. That is, the visible self and the invisible but active other that inhabits it. Take, for instance, a world in which a child is born. For 8 days before the child is initiated into the world through circumcision, he or she is a mystery. No one knows what the child has come with. In the sense of Ilo Uwa, the idea of return or reincarnation, which is part of the Igbo spiritual conception of the world, the belief in a recurrent self, the child must be discerned. He or she is unique in that sense. There is no other like him or her. This fact is verified through divination, the Afa, by which the divine is summoned by a special category of priests, the Dibiafa, and asked to reveal the child's special gifts or characteristics before he or she is named or properly placed in the community of the living. What kind of chi accompanies the child to this world? Is it the munificent chi, what they will call chi oma or ihun oma, or could it be the malevolent kind, which they then attempt to propitiate as much as possible, for each chi is unique to the individual? In the way they would thought of it, however, it reveals itself through divination. No one transfers his or her chi to another. This uniqueness is what marks the Igbo. It is the source of Igbo individuality. Igbo have often been accused of radical individualism. According to those who critique Igbo individualism, this kind of robust and unrelenting selfhood is the Igbo cultural hamartia, the Achilles heels of Igbo, which creates and widens its social dysfunction and the chaos of governance and legitimacy among the contemporary Igbo. Perceived Igbo instability and Igbo inability to compete against more group-oriented, conformist, and normative societies have been laid on the grounds of Igbo ungovernability, the result of so-called Igbo individualism. You hear such descriptions of Igbo as acephalous. This by European anthropologists who could discern neither the head nor tail of Igbo social behavior. The hidden or inherent authority structure of Igbo political organization with its diffuse epicenters of power created the illusion of headlessness for those looking to examine and consecrate familiar authority models among the so-called primitive tribes of the Niger. These European anthropologists soon discovered, however, that Igbo were actually not acephalous. It was just that authority among Igbo did not flow from a single head. Igbo authority structure is hydra-headed. In moments when such things were contemplated, for instance, it was difficult to find which particular head could be lopped off to contain Igbo power of insurgency and resistance. You lop off one head, another emerges quickly in its stead. Ezenwo, Ezanoche, as Igbo would say. From the critics of Igbo individualism, you would hear things like, Igbo are their own worst enemies. They do not agree amongst themselves. Their point being These individualist traits of Igbo makes it difficult for a clear group agenda in the competitive political and social environment or arena of power in a modern multi-ethnic society in which group interests continue to be part of the negotiations for concessions leading towards nation building. Yet, at the core of Igbo group assertion is a summoning call, Igbo Kwenu, which still sends shivers down the spines of those who say the Igbo do not agree with each other. There have been, needless to say, many more instances of Igbo collective action following that hard, difficult, but necessary process of consensus building, which must, if it is to be built, acknowledge the primacy of the right of the individual Igbo. You also hear talks and complaints of incommensurable self-assertion by the highly individualist and self-centered Igbo, whose loud, assertive individualism is unrelenting and bruising competitiveness. The Igbo wishes to dominate his environment, they say, and has no sense of limitations. Igbo assertiveness also conflicts with what their critics often disdain as or with what the Igbo themselves disdain as the docility of more conformist groups, whose forms of assertion are moderated by an innate awareness of their assigned place in the world. To the Igbo, there is no such assigned place. The world is a transitional and constantly evolving place that requires adaptation. No condition, therefore, is permanent. This view, central to the Igbo self-knowledge of the impossibility of permanence, feeds the lions of Igbo self-assertion and individualism. Thus, those who encounter them describe Igbo as meaning I before others, or I go before others. Igbo action is thus framed as deriving from an unwillingness to be contained or by law and governability. It is each one to their own device. Yet, the Igbo disavow autarky or anarchism. To the Igbo, the highest expression of evil is chaos, disorder, and imbalance in the order of the universe, Ekwensu they call it, the very surge of catastrophe. Inborn Igbo culture, therefore, is that threat which the physicist Erwin Schrödinger called negatropy, the cultural resistance against the drift to disorder. It is not just merely that Igbo are high individualists, but they also are containable. That's the point I'm trying to make. The I is the first site of individuation, according to contemporary psychologists, social psychologists. The psychic spot of selfhood, that is the I. The we is the self, projected collectively. What Carl Jung would describe as a collective unconscious. It is significant how Igbo social psychology anticipated Western modernist thought centuries before Europe's modernity. In a sense, I dare say, the Igbo in their thought systems have been modern long before modernity became a thing in Europe. Thus, for instance, Igbo thought of being and consciousness predates Cartesian self-awareness by thousands of years. If you understand that, long before Descartes, the French rationalist philosopher, did his work, they were living inside their forested enclaves, had evolved rationalist thought. Cartesian philosophy, for instance, is epistemologically and metaphysically rooted in the rationalist idea that knowledge is derived empirically by reason through thought. Thus, in his meditations, Descartes famously asserts, cogito ergo sum, I think, therefore I am. Consider therefore that Igbo have known this and lived it long before the cat was in diapers. Well, you know, whatever they used on kids in the 18th century. The Igbo would say to another, che uche, think rationally. It is the roots of methodic doubt. The basis of the Igbo conception of the innateness of ideas is in that axiom, uche wakpa, onye ọbụla bụ nke ya. And it is in a very remarkable way, predates Cartesian dualism in the mind, in that mind-body existence on which the self is consecrated. The Igbo would say, mara onwe gị, know thyself. Noti soton, as the Greeks famously put it, or the Romans, noce te ipsum. The Greeks inscribed this maxim on the first of the Delphic maxims at the pronors of the temple of their god Apollo in Delphi. The Igbo inscribed theirs in their life, in their existential strivings, in the daily existential assertion that includes other maxims, what the Igbo call amam ihe, the knowledge of phenomena, like wa, ezoke, kpachara anya gị, nọrọ onwe gị, etc., etc. Time would not allow me to expatiate on these maxims of a self-aware culture, but a crucial point to note here is the import of the term onwe. The Igbo operate at two phenomenological arenas or zones of self, onwem and onwe anyị. These are rooted in the fundamental principle of shared or contingent selves. The first is the individual self, and the other is the collective self. To the Igbo, one cannot exist without the other. To act unaware of each side of these selves is to be blind to the fact of the visible and the invisible arena of selfhood. But fundamental to this arena is that concept of mu, nagi. The Jewish intellectual Martin Buber, writing about this in his Ich and Du, translated I and Thou in his philosophy of dialogue, seemed to have lifted this straight out of the Igbo philosophy of self. We will assert the premises of the complementary rather than the conflictual self. Mu na onwem and gi na onwegi. In those terms, the onwe is primarily an assertion of the autonomy of the selves in a complementary relationship. Anyone who wants to understand Igbo must contemplate these zones of complementary relationship or complementary action as central to Igbo identity. Igbo assertion of freedom, Igbo industry, Igbo concept of liberty, etc., etc., etc. Onwe is thus connected to one's chi. It is the invisible God residing inside itself, on which no external authority can be imposed. What this means is that Igbo self is rooted in the idea of the divine self, of a divinity of the self that is uncontainable by another. You often say, Muna Chimso, I travel with my divine order. Awareness of this highly individual self, therefore, emphasizes the right of the other to be also. Mu Nagi, thus, is the assertion of the right of the other in a complementary human relationship, to be as fully constituted as the primary self. If you want peace, if you want justice, give the other. If you want peace, ensure that the other has peace. If you want prosperity, share it. If you desire security, ensure that the other has it. Mu Nagi thus complicates the entire question or conception of Igbo individualism. For a culture in which absolutes are forbidden, it must be clear, therefore, that individual freedom is an idea, but extreme is an ideal. But extreme individual action, as in the case of Okonkwo in Achebe's Things Fall Apart, is abominated because it causes an imbalance in the order of the universe. My conclusion, therefore, is that Igbo value the power of self-assertion, the autonomy of self, that grants them liberty and freedom to act rationally. But within that also is the awareness of the collective self, which limits the Mu in its relationship with the Gi in any social commerce within the cosmos of Igbo selfhood. The understanding that the self is a phenomenological linkage of other selves that constitutes Uwa, as Igbo perceive it, is the core of Mu Nagi, and it is the basis of Onwem na Unwanyi, and it is rooted in that fundamental existential relationship called Mu Nagi. I shall end it at this point and hope that we have a discussion around what I have just tentatively provided. Thank you very much.
Yeah, thank you very much, Professor Nwakanma. So I'll give my own understanding, a kind of a sketchy understanding of your presentation. That is what I see as the central point. I'll start with the most some of the last ideas you established, that the individual self is closely associated with the collective or communal self, and that the Igbo concept of Onwe is connected to one's Chi, and that invariably evokes the presence of the presence of the divine in a person. And that it also leads us to the understanding that even though the Igbo value the uniqueness of the individual, and I love how you traced the uniqueness of that individual from birth, you know, where you stated that once a child is born, that the dibias are invoked, are called upon to divine, to the spatial unique attributes of that particular person. So this is, I observed that growing up, and this is what I find unique in Igbo culture. That's the Igbo culture wants to know what is unique in each and every person, and they begin to inculcate it in that child, that you are unique, that you are this, that you are this, but you are also, in that uniqueness, you are also a member of a given community. So I love your conclusion that the individual self is only to be conceived against the backdrop of the communal self or the collective self. So Mu na Owem is complementary to Gi na Onwegi, and it's also, all of these can only find meaning in Onwanyi, so Owem, Onwegi, and Onwai, all of these must be understood. But unfortunately, as you hinted, some people who want to push their individual agenda only focus on Mu na Owem without paying attention to another person's Gi na Onwegi and the group Onwanyi. So I appreciate this philosophical connection, and I think this is a particular, should I say, it opens a window for a discussion of what's going on in Igbo culture today. Why have some of us forgotten the communal or the collective aspect, without which the individual cannot exist? And I love how you said that once you are born, it's the DBS who are invited, the communities are invited, come to make you who you are. They make you a person. They tell you that you are this and that you are that. So logically, you cannot begin to be who you are without paying attention to those who helped you make it. I love this. Could I call it anthropological research or cultural research? But that's what students of Igbo culture must begin to pay attention to. This symbiotic relationship between the individual and community, that even if you are the king of Igbo, remember it's the Igbo who made you realize that you have that potential. I love that the analysis you made. So I will like to invite questions and discussions and suggestions and from the audience. If not, I have my own question, which I believe Professor Bikama will be able to address. So, okay, yeah, Professor Grace.
Thank you very much, Professor Obi. Yeah. It's really a mind-boggling presentation, especially for those of us that have young children that are still trying to find their identity, especially if they are also in a Western world, because of the fact that the West has this individualistic, way of creating the sense of being who you are, meaning whatever you are, it's because of you, nobody else. Nobody else can attribute to who you are, and which is the opposite of what the Igbo culture, projects, that abum onyembu maka, unoa, or something like that. So I am just curious on how, as an Igbo parent, how one can be able to inculcate the ideology of Ani, or the collective philosophy in our children, because today, even within Nigerian context, even within the Igbo system in Nigeria, I see a lot of my niece and nephews, having the concept of moi, if, there was none before them. And so it's quite worrisome. And I'm wondering if there is any way or advice that you have for us on how to handle this kind of situation.
Well, the word advice is a little too complicated for me, because I'm still trying to, understand the shifts in our cultural cartography. Well, but in a sense, it's rooted in our encounters with a world in transition. But the very fundamental way that I look at it is the things we do. That's the best way to teach the young about who we really are. Every now and then, when I'm traveling homewards, because there's something called home for me, my kids help me make a selection of gifts. I try to make them take charge of that process, to know that we belong to people, we belong to communities, we do not exist alone. And I also try to emphasize that very fundamental Igbo philosophical idea, onye si nani ya biri ya cheto kohya. They who wish to exist alone or in isolation must remember the echo of the wilderness. It's lonely. Now you cannot be, anything if the other is not there. You'll be existing in a vacuum. And existing thus in a vacuum does not even, gives you no sense of even accomplishment. That's one. It's only people who can actually assert and recognize your accomplishment. People who are connected in that linkage that I described are those who will celebrate your accomplishment. There is no accomplishment without the other, because it is they who value the accomplishment. It is they who say, you are accomplished and I celebrate you. You cannot celebrate yourself. This is one part. You are alive because people are alive. If nobody is alive, then you're actually basically dead. You can't be alone in that world in which emptiness is value. Yeah. So there are two ways. One is in a private, in our private spaces, in ways we shape those private spaces and connect and show the young how we are all connected. And I think that's the magic. That's actually the genius of Igbo, social space. The idea that there's no central authority, yet all authority is connected. Every town is connected to the other and the other and the other and the other in this fractal relationship, in which everything then is actually connected, that even within that singularity. That's genius, And once we begin to assert the autonomy of the self and the collected and the connection of that collected selves, we will begin to probably recover those lost grounds that we actually see right now. That's one. The other is to incorporate some of these ideas into the school system. Because at the ground of the school system, the public school system, that is, not these private things that we are having all over the place now. The public school system is the means by which we will reinsert the value of, of these two dimensions of authority, what we call the individual and the collective sense, the complementary selfhood. And that's that's the other way by which you can accomplish that, through the, through its circulation by a form of public education that I think we must begin to redesign.
Thank you very much, Obi. Helen Echebima has her hands up, and before she steps in, I think I just need to add to chip into this beautiful discussion. There's this concept I was bombarded with by my father while growing up. That's the concept of Ibambo, which is unique, in Igbo culture, which is unique. That, the Igbo, as my father will always tell me, that if you are my son, Igabambo. If you are my son, you have to do something. Don't, Igbos don't beg. If you refuse to do something, to work, then you are basically betraying the Igbo-ness in you. And then another concept is that you have to make your decision, the uniqueness of the individual person. So I think along the line we have forgotten to emphasize the other aspect, that if the Ibambo, that if you struggle, if you hustle, your community must also benefit. Is also against the backdrop of your community. perhaps, I don't know when it could be the effects of the war, that the war messed up things, but we must, I'm only adding to what Obi said, we must begin to reassert the other aspect of the other side of the coin, that if you struggle, if you maintain your uniqueness, the other side is that you must also look at others.
Well, that's that other aspect of Igbo cultural experience that I think is critical to our understanding of the Igbo South. Yeah. That there's no work or labor beneath the Igbo. The only thing that the Igbo that is beneath the Igbo is the idea of mastery. The Igbo think of work as a form of dignity. Once you have something to do, you dignify yourself. There's no work that's beneath the Igbo. The only thing that the Igbo protect with the highest and with the most severe form of self-assertion is dignity of the self, the inner God projected. And that's why people say, if you strive, if you can only strive and it doesn't work for you, then no one should blame you. Every time anyone should blame you, your chi is don't strive at all.
Okay, Dr. Helen Echebi-Makolio, please ask your question or make your contribution. There one.
Ana m ekene onye gụpụtara anyị ihe nchọcha ya nke isiokwu ya bụ mụ na gị. Ọ magburu onwe ya, ọ gbara na mkpụkpọ, ọ dị mkpụkpọ kama ọ kụrụ nkwa n'elu akpụkpọ. Ihe m ji na-asụ Igbo bụ maka na ihe a na-ekwu isiokwu ya bụ Igbo, ihe gbasara Igbo. Onye a gụpụtakwana anyị ihe a bụ ọka nkụzi Obi Nwakanma. Ọ yọkwara anyị mgbe ọ na-ebido, anọ m ebe a ebido, ọ sị na ọ dị aka ya kwesịrị ịdị Igbo kụzie ihe a ma ọ bụ gụpụta ihe a, mana na anyị nagide ya. O nwere ụzọ ihe abụọ na ihe ọ bụ ọkpa. Ọ na-akọwara anyị na o nwere ihe a na-akpọ onye aghara nwanne ya n'ala Igbo. Onwe onye na-emewenụ ya sị ka sọsọ ya siri. Aghọtakwara na ihe ha na-asị chi onye ele otu chi gị dị, chi gị ọ dịrị gị mma. Aghọtara m ebe ahụ na ihe a na-akpọ chi nwere ike nọchikwa anya onwe. Mụ na chi m so, mụ na onwe m so, gị na onwe gị, mụ na onwe m. Nke pụtara na ọ bụrụ na isi bekee na-akpọ ya emphasis, Igbo na-akpọkwa ya nrụ aka, ọ na-ekwu ihe ugbu a rugide ya aka mụ na onwe m. Ọ pụtara na onye Igbo onweghị ihe ga-ekewapụta onye Igbo na chi ya. Onweghị ga-eke onye Igbo na chi ya so, onye Igbo na onwe ya so, onweghị bụ chi gị. Ka ahụ okwu ihe mụtara. Mgbe na-ekwu na-ajụzi ebe ọ bụ na anyị ụmụaka anyị ugbu a, ndị ntorobịa anyị nwere ugbu a, ọtụtụ ime ha atụmadị ndị a unu na ha bi n'ala bekee, ọtụtụ n'ime ha amaghị ihe anyị na-akọ maka ala Igbo, maka asụsụ Igbo, maka omenala Igbo. Ọ bụ nke a kọrọ ha ka ha ga-eme. Mgbe na-asị ọ dịghị mma ma ndị na Naịjirịa ebe a, ma ndị n'ala Igbo ebe a, ma ndị n'ofesi, ka anyị bidokwanụ n'ugbu a kpọtụwa onwe anyị ihe. Onwe gị ahụ bụ njirimara gị. Njirimara gị abụrụ asụsụ gị. Mgbe ọ bụla mmadụ na-ewere ihe dowe asụsụ ya n'azụ, ọ naghị enwe ụtọ na-esi adịcha. Ọ dị ka mgbe ndị SUA na-ewepụta ihe ezumezu ha kwa afọ. Abịara m ebe ahụ na ihe a o ji wee m iwe ọtụtụ oge bụ mgbe ya na-ekwu gbasara ndị Igbo, gbasara asụsụ Igbo. Gị hụ na mmadụ jikwa bekee na-ekwu ihe gbasara asụsụ Igbo ahụ, iji asụsụ bekee na-asị na ọ dị mma You know, it's good for us to speak our language to our children and all that. A lot of things became ana m asị mgbe anyị bidoro kpọwa asụsụ anyị ihe kpọwa ya ihe ji akpọrọzi ihe ma anyị ndị nke nọ n'obodo a Naijiria anya n'ala Igbo anya ma ụnụnwa ndị nke n'ebe ahụ ọ ga-adịrị anyị ndewo.
Helen, ekelere m gị maka ihe ịtụpụta. Ama m si na asụsụ Igbo bụ ihe dị mkpa ka anyị na-asụ oge niile. Onye ọbụla bụ onye Igbo ma na onweghị ka ị ga-esi hapụ ịsụ asụsụ Igbo ka ọ na-aga n'ihu. Ọ dị mkpa ka ndị ji elemanya ihe a na-eme ihe a na-akpọ culture rịba otu a ga-esi mee asụsụ Igbo ka ọ na-agalite. Onweghị asụsụ ọbụla ga-afụ ndụ ma atụwaghị ya ime. A na-akpọ ịtụwa asụsụ ime, to impregnate the language, ka ọ na-amụbasiwa, ka ọ na-aga n'ihu. Otu a ga-esi mee ya n'uche obi wu ile ihe niile akpọ knowledge system. If you like, you can tell me what. But the knowledge system ndị Igbo translate ya n'okwu Igbo. Onweghị ihe gbagwoju anya ka ịghọta na naanị ihe a translate go n'okwu Igbo wụ Bible, translate by science books on biology, in literature, on everything, philosophy. When he has translated it, n'okwu Igbo yet, ask him ka unu niile gbaka aka ka ebido with this Igbo studies thing, but ka ebido a more fundamental ihe karịrị nke a ka ebido ya na Igbo na ebe ọbụla ndị Igbo bi n'ụwa niile a na-akpọ ụlọ akwụkwọ Igbo, ụlọ ọgụgụ Igbo, in the Igbo schools. That's where we'll get to start this from. And then, over here, Mazi FC Obalubido, years ago, that association agago in decline. Kedu ka anyị ga-esi malite again, so that again where the Igbo Publishing Bureau, the Igbo institutional Igbo support systems that would help us circulate Igbo values at the level of the home, at the level of the community, at the level of our associations. There, in my view, where Bagi Bido regenerate here, or malite again, Bido ihe gbasara omenala na asụsụ ndị Igbo. I mean, that's where to start. I think that, Helen, you have some ideas, and I'll be very glad to work with you or with anyone who is invested in this process. For us to begin, the Igbo school network, the Igbo school system, in every city where the Igbo exists, so that the Igbo children can have the benefit of an Igbo education, a proper Igbo education designed using as a primary basis at the very beginning of it, the Igbo language as a source of instruction. That's what the Jews did. That's what the Chinese have done with the so-called, what they call it now, the Confucius Society. That's what the French school, the Indian school, the English school. We need to start our own Igbo international school system, an Igbo national school system. And it begins with the design of a pre-K system and what we call early child education system, using Igbo as the basis of instruction, as a primary basis of instruction. That we can teach them Igbo culture. Igbo language, Igbo ideas. And that's where I think we ought to begin.
Ekene gị ọhụma, ekenekwezie m Helen tụpụtara ezigbo atụmatụ ya. O nwere ihe, ọ bụ na ụfọdụ n'ime unu nere vidiyo m ji were bido presidency m, ebido mee n'Igbo were mechezie tụgharịa n'asụsụ Bekee. O nwere ihe Helen atụmatụ anyị wepụtara ọma bụ onwe ya, and now ihe anyị ga-ebuga na Igbo Studies Association. So wee bido, ọ bụ na a ga-create panel ga-adị standard for it, you know. And then, because no what ebe anyị na-eje na ọ bụ na ebidoro sụwa asụsụ anyị. Yeah, so ekene gị ọhụma Helen, biko ka anyị be in touch so that anyị ga-ebido na support ha na Igbo Studies Association. Thank you. Okay, so is there any other suggestion, any other thoughts or questions regarding our topic, Mu na Ge, and the Igbo concept of the self? And before, just as a kind of segue, I think Obi, what you said about the Igbo value of work reminds me what you know, of course, the Catholic Church notion of the dignity of labor, you know. And it's there's no work that is beneath an Igbo person. That's another thing I grew up, because I was akajaja. So an Igbo person is ready to do anything in order to earn, and that's the underlying the word, in order to earn his or her living. An Igbo person is not ready to beg. Well, begging is now, you know, but it's just a part of our culture, and we must you know, begin to teach it, because whatever, even if you don't teach any culture, it just dies. It goes, you know, it spins into nullity. Exactly. Now, the very question, people often also have not understood the idea. Obenye Igbo had a system of support, of supporting the vulnerable and the weak. It's called Obenye, let the collective take care of the weak. However, the Igbo resisted. The individual Igbo did not want to be Obenye. They don't want to be supported by, you know, by the Obe, which is, as a matter of fact, why, you know, we often underestimate the Igbo welfare system. The Igbo welfare system was a highly organized system, which, okay, the Obenye system, okay, sort of took care of the vulnerable, but the Igbo, in the very, you know, socialized to be proud and to be self-assertive, to depend on their chi, the inner will, their inner self, the divine in them, rejected even the idea of the Obe Inye. It is only at the most extreme of levels that one could be called a recipient of welfare, Obenye. We must pay attention to that, because often people think that Igbo did not have that kind of, Igbo thought about all this. The very question of work and the Catholic, you talk about Catholic ideas, but I often do say that one of the reasons why the Igbo became very Catholic was because they saw in some ways a lot of themselves in the Catholic system. That's true, but there are also some ways in which I do think that the Igbo ordinary is absorbing the Catholic Church, and maybe in some ways that's what I call reverse conversion, or what I call reversion in many ways. Now, the fundamental point I'm trying to make here is that work is at the core of Igbo life. Honor, whether it is honorable, but connected to that idea of work is also leisure.
We shouldn't forget that, because to emphasize on work alone is to overlook the relationship between Ibambo and Ino, Ino Nuju, right? To be in leisure, right? Leisure is connected to work. So for the Igbo, there must be a time for work. There must be a time for leisure and celebration. We must rebuild the Igbo calendar when there's a period for work, and then there is a period for, for leisure. Because without the other, we'll create a catastrophic society, a society of extreme, of extreme materialism. We need to calm down on the material quest. That's where the Igbo are in danger currently, because we have forgotten the idea of self-healing leisure in pursuit of extreme material, convenience. That's the problem, because that spins into extremes that the Igbo themselves forbid.
Forbid, right.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, Professor Caroline Brown has something, is raising her hand.
Yes, thank you very much, my president. Yeah, I like the last thing he said about the idea of work and leisure. When I was growing up in the 60s and late 60s, early 70s after the war, I remember where I come from, on Orie Day, nobody goes to work. It's a day of leisure. And if your palm wine is running, you don't sell Manya Orie. Everybody stays home and takes Manya Orie. And so you rebuild yourself to get ready for the next Eke Orie for Nkwo. It's built, the leisure is built into that. And in some places too, my place is still a little bit, you can still get the cultural thing from where I come from Eche. So, and about the idea of the Catholic Church and the Igbo culture and all that, getting conversion, I think Bishop Shanahan, the one who is called the Apostle of Igbo land, one of his biographers writing about him, he said that the Igbo have everything they have in Ireland as far as ritual is concerned, that all they needed to do as Irish missionaries was to put their thoughts into the sacramental system. And so when you see the Igbo becoming Catholic, there is something, in the church system that resonates with the way we think as a people. In fact, when I began biblical studies and reading Paul's letters and all, I went to my professor in St. Hall University, Father Frizel. I said, Father, what I'm reading here and reading commentaries, it's like what we do at home. So I said, it's like what we do at home. He said, sit and tell me, so I told him, and I felt very much at home with my new discovery in biblical studies. It's like I'm just walking into what I read, from my culture without even reading it. So I think that's one of the reasons why our people, take on Catholicism, en masse when they did. They didn't have to struggle with it. It's like you walk in, this has been here. Okay, come in. That's where we are. So just what I want to add to that.
Thank you very much, sister. A long time. It's been a while. I think
yes.
last time I saw you was a while ago. But yeah. By the way, as people would, as those who are aware of this might know, the Igbo have always lived in this. A church not too far away from my.
No. I'm culturally Igbo.
The neck of the wood. And you know, I think my grandfather may have had it co in a chair many years ago. Just so you know.
You may be my cousin.
Who knows? My grandfather was very promiscuous, I've been told, you know, but so and we do have Maya Ore. And Maya Ore came with potluck. Every woman had to bring in something to share with the community, with the kindred. It's the day of the ancestors. Yeah, that's Ore. And it's the day when we celebrate a certain, it's like Igbo Sunday, as a matter of fact.
Yes.
So it's true. We need to emphasize that level of, and you know, and on the day we Igbo also celebrate the ancestors, the season of the ancestors. Therefore, when we move from house to house, bringing wine and food as we move, you know, those things are important. Leisure is critical to development of our psyche. It's also vital to the development of kinship and community. It is the basis upon which people assert their collective selves. You know, we must emphasize both work and leisure in the redevelopment of the idea of the self. One of the aspects where we have current crisis in the Igbo world is the loss of the idea of the king. It used to be, as I was told, that you saw Onye Igbo on the road and you felt an immediate sense of, you know, of connection. You needed to protect them or to engage with them. The Igbo had a saying, Ibatanono. You know, the idea that if you are traveling and you got into a place, you first of all had to find out where Onyibo was in the city. If you then found out, it was the obligation of Igbo to make certain that you were given, you know, you were given food and water and pointed your way in the ancient code of the guest visitor. You know, it had to be done. You had to be protected. We need to emphasize the idea that connected to you is the other. You see what I mean? That's where that lies, that you can't exist alone, that you have as part of your being the life of the other. The life of the other is as sacred as yours, because one does not exist without the other.
Beautiful, beautifully stated. This is even getting sweeter and more profound, and Obi, I cannot thank you enough for this wonderful lecture. I don't know whether any other person has any question or suggestion or comment. If not, I think we're almost out of time. Okay. So we've gotten wonderful ideas, and Obi, thank you very much for this lecture. And I use this opportunity to remind all of us that the next lecturer is Professor Caroline Mbonu, and she will be talking about the condition of Igbo womanhood today. So that's just the general sketch, and I'm hoping that we all will come. I will be sending out a flyer and advertisements for that. So thank you very much, and thank you, Obi, and for this wonderful lecture. And
thank you very much.
Yeah, take care.
Thank you.
Absolutely.
Sorry I came late.
I'm looking forward